This next level of diabolic influence or spiritual warfare, oppression, is where the demons attack you from the outside. This is when they attack your relationships, your finances, they attack your property, sometimes your health, things of that sort. So in one particular case, in Memphis, they think I have the gift of healing, which is absurd. I have no charismatic gifts whatsoever. People say, "You're an exorcist, what gift do you have?" Nothing. I got nothing, right? And I'm serious. I've walked into complete and fully infested houses. I'm like, "Oh, look, looks good to me," right? Okay. So, and then I prayed, and then of course things happened. But the point being is that I have no sensitivities in that regard. So that being said, there's a twofold distinction in relationship to oppression. There's indirect oppression and there's direct oppression. Direct oppression is when they actually attack your particular life. They attack you, your health, your relationships, your finances, how things are operating within your home, etc. So they attack you directly. But then there's a certain level of spiritual warfare that all of us deal with where we have to deal with the indirect fallout from oppression. This is when things like politicians and things like that who are under the influence of the diabolic, who do essentially evil things. Let's cut to the chase. We are not living in a political atmosphere where there are differences of ideas. We are living in a political atmosphere where it's good on one side and evil on another. It's not a matter of differences of ideas. The ideas that they throw out are just to promote their evil. It's that simple. If you cut to the chase of it and get down to the bottom of it, there's certain people that are just nefarious. They're just doing evil things. And how do you know this? Every single thing they do maximizes damage within the context of what they're able to do. This is the type of thing that actually ends up affecting us. It is not rocket science. In fact, it's stuff that you can actually read about right on the internet, that there are actual politicians, international politicians, and even some in this country who are actually involved in Satanism and witchcraft. It's not rocket science. And you can tell it by the stuff that they do. Okay, I'm not going to name names. I can see it now. It'll be all over the newspapers. But the point being is that we have to recognize that this indirect oppression that we suffer is when other people do evil things to get demons involved in culture, in society, in the church. It's not a rocket science to see that there's a fundamental problem with evil in the church right now. When you have bishops and cardinals coming out saying that it should be okay for two men to enter into some type of civil contract with each other, there is something fundamentally wrong and evil that's going on in the church. Okay. That being said, these are the things that we have to suffer. We're all suffering indirectly this spiritual warfare that's occurring at that level. It's very intense. Some of the most intense places of spiritual warfare that we end up having to deal with, and this is, again, sometimes it's in the parish, at the upper levels of the parish, sometimes the priest gets attacked. It's at the diocesan levels. The vitriol, the absolute hatred that demons have for bishops, when you see them talking about bishops in possession cases, the hatred they have for them is palatable. You can literally see the hatred they have for them. At the level of the Vatican, it's all where the warfare, we're all suffering from this warfare that's going on at that level, and that's a form of indirect oppression. What we have to recognize, of course, is that the church is indefectible. Christ said the gates of hell will not prevail against it. It doesn't mean that that members can't become really sinful. It doesn't mean that we can't have a Holy Father spouting things that are very odd and strange and even contrary to the faith, because the church itself has said it's only under these conditions that we know that he is infallible and is going to tell us what we know to be the truth, necessarily. Doesn't mean we ignore him, etc. It just means that we have to have a clear understanding of our faith, and that's a very important point. One of the principal ways to combat in spiritual warfare is you have to know your faith. It's not good enough just to say a few prayers here and there. You have to continually learn about your faith so that you don't get sucked into this indirect oppression. Because if you don't, it's so toxic. Modernism, which is now the heresy in the church, is so toxic. It's so much in the air that unless you have a special grace or unless you really know your faith extraordinarily well, you are simply going to end up in error. It's that simple. So you have to pray for God for that. But this is an indirect spiritual warfare that we all have to deal with. And we all have probably experienced this, right? When you sit here and you read some of the stuff that's going on, that's coming out of the Vatican, or some of the things that these cardinals are saying, or some of the things that the bishops are saying and doing, and then the whole pedophilia scandal and all this other stuff that's going on, and then the fact that they were shuffling this around, this is a burden to a good Catholic. And this is the suffering, and this is exactly the kind of attack that the demons are willing to get. If they can't get to you directly, they're willing to take you down by having you despair or give in to discouragement or disappointment or even scandal in relationship to the church. What, of course, St. Thomas Aquinas says there's two kinds of scandal: active scandal, which is when you actually do something that's scandalous. But then there's passive scandal. And what does that mean? It means when you see somebody do something evil and it causes you to sin or to lose your faith. And he says that is sinful. It doesn't matter what these people do. It doesn't matter what anybody does. It doesn't matter what any priest, bishop, or cardinal, or pope, or whatever they do. It doesn't matter. You should know your faith well enough, and you should not allow it to affect your faith at all. It's difficult, but it's part of the spiritual warfare. But this is this indirect. We also suffer it indirectly in relationship to politics. This is one of the reasons why we, as part of spiritual warfare, you have an obligation to vote. The church has reiterated the fact that John Paul II himself even said in one of his documents that each citizen, if they have the right to vote, has an obligation to vote in order to secure the common good for the society. And it's a negligence to do so. It's a sin. That you have an obligation to get out there and do this. Because why? Because we have an obligation, as Leo XIII said, and as Pius XI said, and of all the saints have said, especially the popes in the last 150 years, that we have an obligation to establish the kingship of Christ even in the secular sphere. Even in the secular sphere. And this is an interesting thing. One of the brainchilds of Freemasonry is communism. And communism, and we know that Freemasonry is diabolic from the top to the bottom. In fact, one demon even admitted to me that the name of every single level of Freemasonry is named after a particular demon. We also know at the very top levels it's actually Luciferian. It's not satanic. Satanic, it means that you actually worship Satan, but it's Luciferian, which means you become your own god. So we know that at the top it's Luciferian. But in the communism, one of the triumphs of communism, one of the ways that communism has spread its errors, as Our Lady said at Fatima, is that everybody thinks that the most important thing in an election is the economy. No, it's not. The most important thing in any election is the spiritual and moral welfare of the citizenry. That's the most important thing in an election. The fact that we tend to think it's all about, that the primary thing is about the economy, is the economy stupid? No, actually you're stupid thinking it's about the economy. It really should be about, because why? The only reason that St. Thomas says, he says in his work on De Regimini Principiis, he says, the reason that you have to promote a good economy is so that the citizens can develop virtue. That's what it's there for. But one of the ways that we're dealing with this indirectly, and this is why we have to part of our spiritual warfare, one of the lower levels is just doing our part to help culture, to help the politics, to help the society in relationship to how we vote and what we do, etc., what we support, etc. Those are the things that we must do in order to combat the diabolic influence. And that's just all at the level of oppression.